I really wasn't expecting to make this video, and of all my fish, these were the last fish I expected to make the video about. Otocinclus catfish are notoriously difficult to breed, and there isn't much known about the process. I feel I got lucky with mine, as they started to spawn just as I finished my script for the Otocinclus Beginner's Thoughts video. I am definitely no expert on Otocinclus, but in this video, I hope to give as much information as I can from my observations of my Otto's first spawning attempt. I'm going to start off with my water parameters and tank details. I currently have 7 adult Otocinclus housed in a 100 liter, or about 29 gallon, rimless tank. Other stocking includes 12 rasbora, a grumpy betta, who has been separated as of recording the video, 2 bamboo shrimp, 2 African dork frogs, and some assassin snails. The tank has been set up for well over a year now, and parameters have been consistent and stable. I use dechlorinated tap water for water changes, and it tends to be a little bit cooler than the water in the aquarium, but not enough to really affect the overall temperature. It gets a little too cold where I live to keep the water at room temperature, so I use a heater. This one is preset to 78 degrees Fahrenheit, about 26 degrees Celsius. There is no CO2 or fertilizers being used, and my lights are basic 5000 Kelvin LED bulbs on an 8-hour timer. pH of my water is quite low straight from the tap, measures in the low to mid 6s with mild alkalinity, and hardness measuring about 125 milligrams per liter. This is the best I can give my parameters, as my test strips really aren't the best. Out of the 7 autos, 3 have been in here for over a year when another was added. Then about 2 months after that, 3 more were introduced into the main tank as well. These last ones were added about a month before spawning occurred. The female that was gravid and spawned was the single auto that was added about a year in, about 3 months of living in the setup. Her name is Tofu, and is one of my 3 O macrospillis. Other than adding the other 3 autos a month after, there had been no major changes to the aquarium for the 2 months prior to the spawn. Feeding for the autos is generally an algae wafer, blanched kale or zucchini, or some brown diatom algae that I let grow on rocks in a separate tank and are fed every 2 to 3 days. The tank also gets small amounts of either omega-1 flakes, fluval bug bites, or frozen mini bloodworms or brine shrimp, all varied throughout the week with a day or 2 for fasting, and I give live baby brine shrimps when I can. Most of the frozen foods are target fed to the frogs. Before spawning happened, I did a larger water change and gravel vac that I regularly do monthly. This was about 40%, and again the water was just a few degrees cooler than in the tank. I also tried to sprinkle the water in to give more of a rainfall effect. I also don't know if it made a difference or not, but this time I waited specifically for a day with lower atmospheric pressure to do the water change, so it also added to the natural rain feeling. I do feel like a cool rain is a main trigger for Otocinclus spawning behavior, and this is backed up by a few other experiences shared here on YouTube. When spawning started, the fish didn't seem picky about which type of plants the eggs were laid on. I found eggs on jungle val, java fern, Amazon sword, and a cryptocorn. One thing I did notice, however, the female, Tofu, seemed to only be spawning with a single male, one of my original autos that I've named Noot Noot. Noot Noot would follow Tofu around from plant to plant until she picked one she liked. As he did so, he would swim below her and wiggle almost like a dance. Once a location was deemed acceptable, they would make a T shape, with the male curling around the female to fertilize the eggs as they were laid. This continued on for most of the day, from plant to plant, all over the tank. Eggs looked like small air bubbles that got stuck to the leaves and were laid in groups of 2 to 3, but not every attempt would produce an egg. I'm unsure of how many there were in total, but it was a fairly large number. As the two fish traveled around the tank, it seemed as though the male was somewhat protective over the female. There was no aggression, but it looked like he would gently shoo away the other otos or rasboras if they got too close. As the day went on, I noticed the colors of the otos that were breeding were beginning to fade a bit, almost as if they were getting tired. It was around this time that I finally noticed the female allow a different male in attempt at breeding. It was not the other Macrospilus, however. It was my very first oto, an O. vestitus, I named Pingu. I was curious if different Otocinclus species would crossbreed, and while this may not be true for all species, this shows that it can happen. After the spawning process was finished, it took almost exactly 3 days for the eggs to hatch. During this time, I had no issues with any of the eggs being eaten by the other inhabitants. Even my grumpy betta papaya didn't seem interested, though I'm sure some types of fish or snail would find these a delectable treat. As the eggs were developing, the eyes, yolk sac, and even the stripe were starting to become visible. Hatching started tail first, and the fry would wiggle vigorously until free, where it would then continue to stay in the same spot for hours. Some fry moved before others, but most stayed put until the next day. For the first 2 days, the fry didn't need to eat, as they consumed the nutrients from their yolk sacs. On the 3rd day after hatching, most of the yolk sac was gone, though still somewhat visible on some fry. Mouths and fins were also developing more and becoming more visible. Their eyes looked too big for their bodies, though. Though still mostly translucent, the typical Otocinclus colors were just beginning to show through. I had also seen one of the fry that was seemingly chowing down on some biofilm at this point. I was able to find at least 10 fry visible at the same time, likely with many more hiding in the leaves and roots. They were quite mobile now, swimming freely and very quickly, already showing some typical Otocinclus behavior. At this point, I'm going to go backwards a little bit. When the eggs were laid, I had separated out one of my larger Java ferns that the otos spawned on into a small 3-gallon tank, along with some other seasoned media, substrate, and rocks. Water was also taken directly from the main aquarium, so parameters were identical, and was refreshed a little bit every other day. A hang-on back filter was used to create a steady current. This was done to try to give a set of eggs the best chance they could have with no types of predator, while most of the eggs were left in the main tank with cranky fins. Between being eaten and being able to find something to eat, I honestly didn't want to get my hopes up for any of the fry, no matter which setup they were in. I tried to add items with more diatom algae, which is why the skull is here. My adult otos love the algae-covered rocks, and could slurp all of this clean in less than an hour. I figured this, along with the microfauna such as ostracods, copepods, metapods, etc., would make for a good natural food source, with options for both protein and plant. I also added in a small piece of blanched zucchini and kale, and a small streak of powdered algae fish food that I smeared on the glass just to try to cover as many bases as I could. There was also a good layer of biofilm that had built up on the Java fern and the stick that I put in there. Unfortunately, I did not see the fry on anything other than the leaves or glass, and I'm unsure of what they were eating, if at all. A week after the eggs hatched, and at the time of writing this video, I am now unable to find any fry. While there is a chance that some are still hiding somewhere, as I stated, I'm not getting my hopes up. They seemed to be doing very well for the first few days, active, alert, and it looked like they were finding something to eat on the leaves and glass. When I did find one in the community tank, the other fish and frogs didn't even seem to realize the fry were there. Though I can only assume at least some of them were found by papaya or even the rasbora. Though I doubt the frogs could outsmart a fry. Though spawning went well and lots of eggs were produced and hatched, I was unsuccessful in raising the fry on this attempt. Noot Noot is beginning to show signs of eggs again already, along with 2 of the newer vestitus now as well. As of making the video, the males are very persistent and following the gravid females everywhere trying to impress them. I will continue to watch for spawn attempts and try to record anything pertaining to what triggers spawning, as well as any success I find in raising fry. If you have any other tips for breeding Otocinclus or raising the fry, please leave them down in the comments below. Hopefully, some of the information in this video can be helpful to someone else and be used to work towards having less wild-caught otos and more tank-bred otos. Thanks for watching.